So we are doing open discussion. Good to see everyone. Good to be back. Um, I have a case study for today. I thought it might be nice to give our listeners just kind of like a day in the life of what might be an actual project that an IO might work on, and with a dual purpose because it's August, so it's IO Psychology Awareness Month, which I know Linda Ann talked about during the last two sessions. I'm so used to these coaching sessions. Last two podcasts. And this is a version of one of the case studies that we have in we got to plug shameless plug our IO Career Accelerator course. We're giving it's for August because it's IO Psych Awareness Month. We're doing 30% off, and for podcast listeners, just to make it a slightly more interesting, 32%, so we can track where that's all coming from. 32% off with code aware 32 for that particular code. Now, so this is one of the case studies. There are so many. I think we have like 120 different niche areas of IO psychology mapped out in the course. And uh, Dr. Morton here, Heather's here. She's one of the people that help with the course in a very big way. Workbook. There'll be an email coming out. I'm going all over the place. Tom, I haven't been here in a while, so I don't even know where to start, where to go. But we do have a workbook that we're gonna make available to the public as well for people that don't want to take the course that can help people on their path. So this case study, it is in the show notes. If you're listening to this on the podcast, just look in the show notes. There'll be a link to it. And I'm actually going to put it back again for anyone who just joined so you can see it in the chat. It is a link to a PDF. This particular case study, I'm going to have to read a little bit, pull up what I have for mine. I have a condensed version, so that way nobody wants to hear me read for 5 minutes. So I have a condensed version. I do have a couple questions of my own, and by all means, if you have a thought, a question, even a challenge to how Dr. Thompson is the character in this particular one, how she went about doing things, please speak up. So the case study, it's basically enhancing leadership effectiveness through executive assessment for upper management at a financial services firm. So I'm going to start out with here's what's going on, here's what happened, here's the result. In 2021, a prominent financial services firm, we're going to call it Pinnacle, faced a significant leadership challenge with upper management. There's 5,000 people in this company. It's a US company, and there's inconsistent performance across its various departments. In the long version, you'll see how important it's a very important financial services firm. So there lots of talented managers, and there's gaps that they've noticed in alignment, decision making, leadership effectiveness, and overall the firm's performance and ability to respond to market shifts has been going down, down, down. So the CEO is concerned about these implications, short term, long term, with all these management issues. So they call in a IO psychologist, Dr. Thompson. We'll call her Dr. Thompson. Now, her role is to design and implement. That's important. Really, a comprehensive assessment program to provide insights into what's going well, like a stop, start, continue. What's going well, what's not going well, etc. Now, the IO psychologist begins by reviewing what's on paper, right? Leadership structure, recent performance data, challenges faced by upper management. Then she gets into one-on-one interviews with, again, the discovery phase with key managers, senior leadership, and department heads to gain a deeper understanding of what's going on. My first question there, and maybe someone will want to speak on this, is a consultant really going to understand everything that's going on? Because if it's a management problem, if they're only talking to key managers, senior leadership, and department heads, what about everyone else? What about the people that are being managed, the people that are the closest referees to the manager's style, to what's going on within a team, to blind spots, to gaps? So that's a question that came to my mind. So through these interviews, the Dr. Thompson, through this assessment, she revealed a couple key issues: variability in leadership styles and effectiveness, limited adaptability and innovation. I'm sure we've never heard of that happening. Succession planning changes and gaps in strategic thinking and decision making. So this is her plan. Uh, a barrage of psych assessments, psychometric assessments for cognitive ability, could be like your Watson Glasser test. Personality traits could be your Hogan barrage of your bright side and your dark side of personality, even your maybe your values. Leadership styles might be something like the leadership practices inventory, and even emotional intelligence. She also went and got 360-degree feedback from supervisors, direct reports, peers. And I added into this at least one support staff. It wasn't originally in here, but I think that's important. Having someone as support staff, even if it's a vendor, if it's an admin, if it's an admin from a different silo, that's important because you get to see yet a different side of an individual. So, and all this feedback was, all right, leadership competencies and company values. Dr. Thompson also did in-depth interviews with each of the managers just to get a baseline, right? Leadership experiences, decision-making processes, how are they handling challenges in the past? And then you're on paper through a 360 assessment. This is your, or wait, did she go there? Am I skipping ahead? Yeah. So a 360 assessment, I might have mentioned that already, from supervisors, direct reports, peers, and one support staff. And also, what I want to say now is 360 interviews. So interviews. Typically, we see this happening with maybe four people, maybe five people, where the consultant will get on a Zoom with supervisor, one or more, direct reports, hopefully a couple, peers, hopefully a couple, and again, a support staff if possible. So then program is in design phase. Oh, hold on. Actually, I see some hands up. Should I pause? Do you guys have thoughts right now? Where you want to interject? No, no, keep going. I got the wheel. All right. Key activities for this next phase: assessments, interviews, analyze the results, individual debriefs, and then developing individual development plans. I think on the paper that you all see, it says personal development plans. I'm just familiar. I call them individual development plans. So that's the terminology I'm going to use. Either fits. Phase three is the integration of like all these assessment insights. So the key elements of this phase three is executive coaching, really big on that. Strategic leadership workshops, cross-functional leadership assignments, and so forth. I'll mention now that workshops, there's got to be some kind of follow-up and some kind of plan. It's so important, even if you split people up into smaller cohorts, to continue to meet based on very specifically what were the leadership workshops. I mean, how many times have we been to a workshop or in a training and we remember close to nothing, very little, unless it really sparked us and we're keeping those notes and really going over those notes because it meant the world to us. And I talk to people time and time again where they talk about, yeah, we had this emotional intelligence workshop, or we had this project management workshop, or we had this soft skills workshop, and they mention maybe one thing from it and it wasn't that impactful. The key is always follow up, and if possible, follow up with supervisors as well, which I read in one study. Supervisor support after any kind of training or coaching for 6 months accounts for about 70% of the lasting impact. So continuing with phase three, team alignment and development. Succession planning and talent management, ongoing monitoring and support. Results. Every time I don't know, Tom. Every time I see the word result, I think of you and I think of something green because you're always asking, well, what is the result? And I remember just in many podcasts in the past, whenever I'm looking through and when we're talking about these studies, I would always highlight it green and I always make a note, Tom will love this. So, side note, here's some results.
Well, before you get
You,
to the results, let me ask you a question.
yeah, please.
Because strangely enough, a couple of days ago, I had a conversation with someone, and she's quite frustrated because her organization decided to, well, initially it was do an organizational review. Brand new CEO. First thing that they wanted to do was do an organizational review. So they hired a consultant, and then they found out how much the consultant cost, and they decided to do the review with upper management. Um,
Okay.
And now, she's waiting for the results of this review, which didn't involve her at all. She's middle management. And they're not, looking at doing a lot of training, I'm assuming. So here's an organization that decided to do a review, but they did basically the bare minimum. What's going to happen to them? How quickly is it going to go off track?
So you're saying upper management basically provided the insight that was necessary. They
Yep.
all the information gathering.
Yep. Just the executives.
So brings me back to that quote from a book I can't remember. Companies always never have the time and money to do it right the first time, but they always have the time and money to do it again. So
Yeah.
that comes to mind. Your, I was doing I was doing a final manager session, coaching session this morning, and something important came out of that, which was so basically after maybe a 6 month coaching uh, engagement, you have to one after about 2 months and then one at about 6 months with the supervisor, with the manager to get them up to date, talk about the IDP, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the managers this morning said, I stopped asking general questions of the managers below me because they always gave me a rosy view. Instead, I started asking very targeted questions. What exactly is going on? What exactly are the challenges, et cetera, et cetera. And now you're getting all, and he said, now we're getting all this, whoa, 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 that shouldn't be happening. Where for years and years, it was simply, okay, let's move on. So one of the challenges, of course, people want to make their departments and so look good. So you might not be getting the exact data that you can. There is something to be said about third party and how they go about that,
Right.
especially someone that's trained in collecting that particular data. It depends on, I mean, think about what the company is. Think of company X and Y and Z. Are these, whatever their skill set is and whatever their focus area is, are they trained in data collection? Are they able to change and look at different perspectives? So that can matter too, because you get where I'm going. So you said, what was your end question?
Well, I mean, basically, they're not going to get any benefit really. They might get some benefit for upper management, but it's not really going to be a reflection of the organization or give them a path forward for improvement, is it?
Without talking to other people that are the closest referees to what a potential problem would be, like staff, like different kinds of staff and staff at lower levels, I think there's a danger there. But also, you've got a ton of bias. There's no way around that. And if they if those managers could provide what was needed in order to help the company move forward with a plan to make things better, wouldn't they have already provided it in meetings that they have already been having? Because isn't that their job in the first place? So I guess, have some thoughts on that.
All right, back to what we're going to do once we get them to buy in and they're going to actually go down through this process.
So the results, highlighted in green, improved strategic leadership, 12% increase in revenue driven by more focused leadership and improved decision making. I'm reading from the thing now. Enhanced team collaboration, reduced silos, and improved collaboration among managers. And so, Tom, while I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about, would these results have occurred if the manager's currently in the situation, in the weeds, in that, with those blinders on, would these results have happened, and would the plan have gone the same with their data collection? Increased adaptability and innovation, stronger succession planning, and organizational culture. 15% increase. It's a bit high. And engagement scores and noticeable reduction in turnover among high performing teams. So there's lots that we can talk about today in terms of what do you think were the most impactful parts? Would it be the assessments to have to for managers to get more insight and awareness into their own behaviors, potential derailers, thinking style, decision style, ability to be ability and willingness to be coached? Would it be the executive coaching that would be the most impactful? Would it be the leadership workshops that would be the most impactful? We can see there's a good approach here. It's just like when hiring a candidate, you don't want to take a resume. Perfect world, you have job simulations, you've got like behavioral questions, you've got a whole range. Well, Dr. Thompson here in this case study is providing really a barrage of different kinds of assessments. And then another point to consider: some people will undoubtedly fail with the resources that they're given. Everyone who is given the ability to work with a support group, work with a coach, work in any kind of cohort like that, workshops, they won't take it as others will. There is sometimes a stark contrast between your person that really took all these resources seriously and went with them and got excited and energized versus the people that were too cool for school. Tom, back to you.
All right. Well, let's go to Dr. Emmy.
Welcome back, Jeremy.
Thanks.
I was taking some notes here because I think, one, I wanted to touch on the question that you directly asked, but two, I have some questions to return. And so about a consultant being able to know and understand, the environment, I'm not sure exactly how you worded it. It's interesting. I was having a conversation just yesterday about the concept of 360. So the organization I'm working with for leadership development is targeting certain areas based on EXI scores. And it was one of the things, 360, that I identified as a potential candidate for being able to provide some deeper information based on the specific questions that were asked. But reject is kind of a strong word, but I'll use it. It was a rejected idea that the culture wasn't ready for it, that the leaders weren't ready for it, that the environment wasn't primed to do 360, that it had never been introduced before. And I was actually a little taken aback. I definitely took the feedback. I'm not going to implement or introduce something that leaders aren't ready for, but it really begets the question of why. And that to me kind of is one of those unspoken cultural things. And so that's kind of the thing that I would say is maybe a challenge for a consultant in an environment when you have ideas rejected or not. It sounds like they were receptive to it here. Maybe they had enough pain to be open and willing to try new things. But that to me would be one of the challenges. What is not spoken about our culture? What is under the covers, if you will, when you pull it back? And that's going to be where the consulting can really start to do some real good, I think, when some of those things are exposed. And I love the 360 because it does give highlight to underrepresented voices that typically aren't invited to the conversation. So your individual contributor, or perhaps someone that's not so vocal, that will offer their opinion, but when they are asked, will be able to provide it. So to me, there's a lot of wins about 360. The other one that you mentioned that's been rejected by the same organization is the concept of succession planning. It's almost like you can't talk to people about what it's going to be like when they're gone. And something I think I took even from a podcast here was to highlight the concept of legacy. What legacy do you want to leave? So I'm using that word. Thank you, whoever it was that said that in a past podcast. But I think both of those particular things speak to the same underlying cultural element in this particular situation. But I wonder if in this case study, if it would have resulted differently if there were not the cultural priming and readiness for those sort of assessments or those sort of plans. And I would love to, dive deeper into the hows of some of these results because of that. That one of them said the focus on leadership development improved employee engagement and job satisfaction. But how? What area of leadership development? What was developed? What things were they receptive to that they changed? Be very interested to kind of dive deeper in a real case study to see what some of the hows or the whys were. Another one was increased adaptability and innovation based on leadership development initiatives. So leadership development is kind of broad from a general term. So I'd be super interested to hear what targeted adaptability, what targeted innovation, what opened dialogue and broke down silos a little more specifically, because I think those are the rich learnings that people can take from a case study and then apply in their settings.
Jeremy, I think that's directed to you.
Was that a question or a wish?
Well,
I didn't get
it's
it.
both. It's both. If you've got the answers, I'd love to hear them, but
I was
if not, then it's a wish.
got it. So as you're saying that, I was actually looking through the full case study, and it's not in there. The questions that you ask. So that's a good thing that can be put in there. Thank you.
And thank you for them, Rich. And Rich will come to you in a second. But Jeremy, could you, a couple of years ago, you and I had a conversation, and I asked you, like, you sit down and you have a conversation initially with a potential client. And one of the questions you'll ask them is, when I do my work and I'm looking for the issues in your organization, if I find out you're one of the issues, do you want me to tell you or not? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I remember the exact example, and it's the answer is always yes. I want you to be honest. The follow up is always, do you want me to be brutally honest? And that's when they squirm a little bit, but they eventually say okay. And that's a good example of why it's important to get not just the people that are higher up in the organization. It was a director of a sleep clinic that it was a director of a sleep clinic that I was consulting with. This was back in I think 2010. And he was wondering why he had to spend so much time after hours going over things that what there's constant mistakes because there's tons of like government review and all this stuff. Everything has to be nice and tight. And morale was very low. It was just a bad mood with everybody. So I went and I talked to the people working there, and what I got from the director was I roll my sleeves up, I get in there, and I show them that I'm not above them and I'm very helpful. I have lots of conversations with them. So, again, to your point about earlier, if a manager is going and saying this, that's good. Okay, not much to see here, folks. But if you have a third party coming in, collecting data, especially from the right people, what I ended up doing is talking to everyone else, and they said he's always hovering over us, even when we're drawing blood from a patient. He's in there just with his nose over what we're doing, and there's a stark difference in terms of the intention versus perception, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So talking to the right people, and that was that moment where it was a combination good of brutally honest, yes, okay, here's what's being perceived, and here's how to solve the problem with a good result. So yeah.
There you go. Thank you for that. Rich, let's go to you.
Yeah. What struck me about this case study is the format and everything. So, as a certified management consultant, it does my heart good that they brought in next. So for the outside, my friend Dan Pinkham, he's a management consultant, Six Sigma black belt, and I think he's in the Kansas City area, but Dan likes to say that you can't read the label from the inside of the jar. So it's kind of nice to have somebody coming from the outside looking in. But I'll say that this scenario reminds me of. So I was a pathfinder through CBOC. right? So when I started, so if anyone doesn't know CBOC, who is sponsoring this podcast, puts out this podcast, Society of Evidence-Based Organizational Consulting. Linda Ann actually was one of my mentors, and she helped me to design for my consulting a 3-part process, which was assess, amend, and align, which is like right there, right? So and so this consultant came in, did kind of a meta-analysis using various different types of, if anybody doesn't know what a meta-analysis is, statistical technique that combines the results of multiple studies to integrate the findings to draw more robust conclusions. Just so the listeners who don't don't know that, know what I'm talking about. But taking all those different assessments and putting those together to create a snapshot of what's going on there. So that assessment part is super important. Then doing the amend part, all those. Well, first of all, there's the planning part, right? How are we going to plan? So if you don't fail to plan, you plan to fail. I'm just throwing out all kinds of trite things right now, but the fact is that, like, I'm really happy that they actually went with a plan first, and then did the interventions, right? That's the word I was looking for, right? So, but then I love the fact that after that they have the ongoing support part, right? So they're keeping everything aligned with that ongoing support. As I think the Institute of Management Consultants would be very, very happy to see that process. So.
And Jeremy, Rich is right, where I don't know how many times as an employee, I've done workshops. I've done a lot of workshops. I've done training, but there's never, ever been any follow-up. And so
it's that ongoing support that, there's a reason why people, sometimes organizations roll their eyes and go, oh, I'm going to go into this, retainer or whatever, right? But the fact is, it very easily falls out of practice and falls out of alignment and goes right back to status quo, or slides back even worse without having that ongoing support from somebody who was integral into the integration of the intervention. Yeah.
I had a very smart university instructor who said to us one day, I can teach you everything you need to know in a year, but you need the repetition of 4 years to actually get it. And that made a lot of sense to me. Thank you very much for that. Jeremy.
I think it's over to Nick.
Oh, yes. Sorry, Nick.
Worse things have happened. It's interesting to see the case study because, having a similar background, to echo Richard's point, this is exactly what you want to see. As an IO psychologist, this is exactly the way it should be. And, it's got all the theory and it's got all the data and it's got that curiosity. Like if you're walking in as a consultant, I think that's the key driver to figure out, who do I need to be talking about? What information do I need to gather? How do I diagnose the whole problem? And then you also have to be adept at translating it. So if you go through all this data collection and you have all these opinions and all this feedback, well, how do you package that and deliver it to an organization that, if they've brought in a consultant, is likely got some sort of pain point working already? And so just the communication skills required to get that, conversation of, well, if I'm going to be brutally honest, you're the problem. You're micromanaging. You see it as being, an active manager, and everybody else is just, get out of my way. I can do this. And so addressing those perception issues. But I think that there is a reality that, the theory and the practice don't always match up. You can get all this data, but if the organization doesn't want to hear it, isn't ready to hear it, or doesn't understand what you're saying, it's going to fall on deaf ears, and it's a lot of wasted time. So I think that, part of any walking into a situation has to be, well, what do you actually want? Do you want me to solve problem A? And if I discover problem B, solve that too? Or, do you just want me to go with, broad strokes and a blank canvas? But if you're not solving the problem the organization sees, you're not doing them any good, even though you have all the theory and knowledge and evidence to say, this is how you can do it better. They want what they want. They want what they paid for.
Jeremy, agree with that?
I don't have any objection to that at all. Sometimes it's a matter because sometimes you can push as much as you want. Like, here's the discovery, here's the findings, and here's what we suggest. But sometimes that's best you can do is give recommendations and let them pick through, and then they meet together. You've got this maybe like their strategic leadership team, and they're picking through your recommendation of, all right, let's, if we can only really focus on one or two things, because you can find, I mean, you could find even like 8, 9, or 10 things that are going wrong, and at some point somebody's going to have to everyone's going to have to agree, all right, which are the ones that we're going to attack. So that's where, and again, any consultant could come in, and you're making a recommendation based on, here are the pain points, here's what's going on, and you can make a recommendation, but you should still put. So I completely agree, everything there, because that leadership team is going to have to decide overall.
Thank you for that. Lee, let's go to you.
Ooh, so much to unpack as always. Tom, one thing that came to mind when you were talking about that professor is one of my mentors said that practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes permanent. Perfect practice makes perfect. And so, yeah, you can do the same thing over and over and over again. And, like the definition of insanity, you did what you always did, you're going to get what you always got. So you have to make those changes. So, but a big thing is that if you're going to go in and you're going to do, you're going to meet with the leaders, you're going to do an intake and all that kind of stuff. There's got to be very, very clear communication and very, very clear expectations. And I love Jeremy's thing about, if the problem is you, do you want to know? And if the answer is no, then maybe we should stop now. But you got to be very, very clear about what is our goal, because you can come in and say, fix the problem. Well, that's broad. So you need to actually go through and figure out, what is it that we're actually trying to do? Is there a particular pain point that you're trying to look at? And something that'll just warm Amy's little heart is, kind of go with an agile kind of thing. You have to prioritize, and almost in like a scrum kind of thing. Okay, so we're gonna start here, and we're gonna prioritize. As we like to say, what's the closest alligator to the boat? So that's the first thing we need to focus on, and then we can iterate from there. Because you may find out the problem you thought was a problem isn't the problem. Okay, well, that's cool. We've got an answer. So let's set this to the side and let's move on to our next thing. And you can actually go through and find your prioritization, because you can't do everything. As much as we like to think we can, you can't. So you got to, it's like the old saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So you got to figure that out. What is the first bite? And if you really, and to like Rich's point on the follow up and everything, if you really want it to stick, you've got to give not just new behaviors, but you have to give new ways to do those behaviors. You have to do check-ins. You have to do new tools, new strategies. All this comes down to creating new habits, because what you do at work, we don't think of it that way, but what you do at work is a habit. We are creatures of habit overall. That's what people are. And you can't change a habit, at least not very easily. I mean, we have science that shows us that. You have to create a new habit so that you can extinguish the previous. You just strangle it on the vine. But you have to actually create the new habit. You got to create the new pathways and the neural pathways in the brain for the new thing. But you have to discover what that is, plan how you get there, and then you got to make it repeatable.
Thank you very much for that. Dr. Emmy, let's go to you.
First and foremost, thank you for the agile call out, Lee. It did warm my heart. You were right. But secondly, one of the things, and this is probably more a question, but as Lee was talking there, and I think a couple of other people touched base on kind of the follow-up and the revisit and the reflection, And I think even in the case study, it talked a little bit about making sure that some of the changes stick, right? How often are we seeing that in reality? And I think Rich may have alluded to that a little bit, because I find it frequently challenging, even as an internal resource, to go back and revisit. Sometimes I get pushback from leadership. We've already talked about that. We've touched on it. But whether you do a 6-week follow-up and 6 month or a year later, how are you making sure that some of these changes are sticky? And I present the question to anyone who cares to answer it. How often are you seeing that done in reality? And what are the ways in which you're using as strategies, right, to get receptiveness to it? Because I frequently find that to be something that people find cumbersome to join is the conversation again. We already did this 6 months ago or 6 weeks ago. How do we keep that stickiness and then measure the outcomes long term and have people receptive to that in the best ways?
Jeremy, I think that's over to you, or anybody else who wants to jump in. Jeremy is scanning his copies right now, trying to find the answer.
No, I'm scanning the hands up. I think one of them will have. Yeah, go ahead.
No, that was over to you. Well, let me ask you, like, when you're working with your clients, how are they participating, those who need to, in a more long-term training program where you're not just going in and doing a workshop, but you're actually doing 6 month or a year training? Or do you actually have clients who, like, they come and see you, twice a year?
That's the part that I missed from Emmy, because there was and this is actually a good. It's what I was thinking of and what I was writing down based on what she was saying. I missed that last part. So in terms of the length, ideally, I'm a big fan of the executive coaching aspect, because you get such, and even typically what we do is it's twice a month for 6 months, and a lot of people say, well, how can 1 hour every other week really be impactful? So in terms of length, I was also thinking when Emmy was talking about that about the 360. Ideally, and I was just lost in this thought. Ideally, you would have a 360 before and a 360 after coaching, but it gets expensive for the company. But that's one of the things, like, we can't do everything that we want to do and everything that makes complete sense, because there are budget constraints, there's time constraints. It's not just the cost of the assessment, it's the cost of the consultant. Even if it's just pure getting the assessment out and getting it to the people, there's still people that have to take time to do that 360, which is time off the clock, et cetera, et cetera. So back to that other part in terms of longevity, 6 months, even better is an option for 6 months with a 3 month extension and then a 3 month extension. There are plenty of people that say, can we continue? There's plenty of manager meetings where, like, are we able to continue? And sometimes it's just not in the companies. They'll say no. We've done 6 months. We're not going to put more into it. But in terms of the results, to get to the essence of what you guys are saying, the results that can be had in just 6 months, which is really a total of 12 hours. I'm wrapping up a full cohort of a 6 month cohort. And one thing that I like to do is in the IDPs and these individual development plans, which are typically in a spreadsheet, either in the skill to be developed column or the objective column, whatever we've really been working on, and we use that IDP as really a roadmap. It's not a PIP. I'm not talking about a personal improvement plan like, hey, you're going to get fired, you need this. I'm talking to something different, just so, because everyone has their different lingo. I'm talking about one that's purely used for development, right? More low stakes situation. No one's career is on the line. It can be used for succession planning, strictly leadership development, identifying these high potential leaders within a company and noticing, like, rising stars. So that's the type of situation. But I like to take a, baseline within the first call or two of, on a scale of 1 to 10, get a self report of how they think they are in this particular area. Yes, do we already have the data on the 360s, self-report data? Yes. But after all this analysis comes through, you end up with what are the development needs based on the written 360 feedback? What are the development needs based on all the interviews that you're doing with the peers, direct reports, support staff, supervisor, et cetera? So then you come up with this list of development needs, which is often, I have found anyway, about 5 to 10 things that are development needs. And then what we do is we go and we pre-fill out the IDP based on what our recommendation is for that individual. But then when we start coaching, that's when it's really, I do it completely. I have the IDP there, but I make a copy of it and I just go blank slate. I say blank slate. What are the things, in different words, but what are the things you think you want to work on? And then we match those up because we want it to be their idea. I don't personally want them to be, okay, you're putting me in this box. This is what I think I should work on. 9 times out of 10, it's perfect alignment anyway. Plus, they've already they've read their own executive reports, so they kind of have an idea. And then scale of 1 to 10, self-report on this particular area. Let me just get an idea. I did have one ready for today. Talk about. So it could be like a key area to strengthen, for example, might be improving stakeholder relationships. And maybe some of the knowledge, skills, and abilities to be developed would be build stronger connections with direct reports and peers across different locations. Develop assertiveness and confidence through influence skills. So we would take that more specific column and do a scale of 1 to 10. At 0 month, maybe 3 month, and maybe 6 month, or whatever, whenever it really comes about. There's no particular time that it has to be. And I was crunching some data, and the average increase is about 4 to 5 points that's pretty big. Going from even a 2 to a 6, or you never get a 10. 10 is just you never really want the 10 either. Well, maybe you want a 10. But even going from something like that, like a 4 to an 8, those are big numbers. Those are really big jumps. And the momentum that people get throughout this kind of a process can be really huge. I want to read, because I had this ready too, because it can be very effective. There have got to be, if I wasn't in the field, I would say it's not, if I was in a different line of work, I would probably listen to this and say, you guys you're full of it. There's no way this can work. People have personalities. You can't change your attitude. You can't change behaviors. It's not going to work. That would probably be me. But I'm in it. I've seen results. This is after 5 months. This was a session at 5 months. And this has to do with succession planning too, because this person's supervisor was retiring, right? Executive retiring. This person knows they are stepping into that role. There's no doubt about it. Great person, great guy. Here's the quote at the 5 month mark. I recognized I wasn't focused on overall leadership, and I was happy just being really a project manager, working together with the team instead of actually leading the team. Now, this is a leader in a high position. Now I recognize the opportunities and the impact of becoming a respectable leader, which is my ultimate goal. I've had a total increase in leadership awareness, and I'm no longer just sitting back and focusing on doing my project work. I went from being an individual contributor to an actual leader. So that's probably a big deal for everyone in the company, for himself, for confidence with that succession plan, and especially for the employees. People want leadership. People crave leadership. Back to that, I might have mentioned it. I don't know. You talked about it a couple of years ago. I might have mentioned this a couple of years ago. You have a substitute teacher in a classroom, and somebody throws an airplane at the substitute teacher. People aren't looking at the people who threw the airplane. They're looking at the substitute teacher because they want to see what that person's going to do. They're looking for that leadership. So this is a big deal. But to give you some idea, also on check-ins, there was someone else. Is that yesterday, last coaching session? The question was asked. She said, How steep of a drop off is this? And do you have any check-ins? Like, do we check in a month and 3 months and 6 months? And it does go back to that organizational constraint sometimes where, again, it's the funds, it's the coordination. There's a lot that goes into even something like that. So ideally in that situation, you would have some kind of like even an alumni cohort, people that are going through the program, especially if hopefully it'll be a continuous program because like in this particular example, this particular case study, they're focused on succession planning, identifying high potential leaders within an organization. So hopefully they plan on doing this, year after year or whatever. And developing, again, we talked about support a lot, some kind of support system where it's not a steep drop off. They go and they have access to cohort one from 2022, cohort two from 2023. And that way that can help them because these people have all been coached by the same people. They've experienced the same types of assessments. They understand X, Y, and Z. So there's a support system there. And ideally, there would be a group coaching session, maybe at the 2 month mark after the fact. So, like the 8 month mark, I guess, if we're talking in totality. And then maybe a group session at the 12 month mark. And then maybe a group session at the 18 month mark in order to keep that live and keep that support. And coaches, even if it's not in your if it's not in your agreement with the organization, at least of course you want to see if it's okay. Different organizations are get finicky, but at least try to 4 months, 6 months, check in with the people that you coach, just some kind of an email, bring it back front and center. But the other thing is, I lost my screen. Did Tom fall off? Is Tom still here? I think we lost Tom. Okay. So, oh, good. I'll keep talking. So the other thing is, oh, great. I lost my train of thought. I'm going to get my train of thought back. Tom, you're back. Welcome back to Work Cookie
Took a little
podcast.
vacation.
Yeah. I lost the train of thought. So I'm going to go to Jason. Maybe I'll get my train of thought back. Maybe not. But Jason, please. Welcome.
I appreciate it. So I'm just kind of curious, within the phase one here, where's the review of policy and that human experience with policy come into play? Because to me, it seems we're really focused on the leadership side. We're focused on improving leadership and some of the organizational side, but it doesn't really recognize policy as being part of that human experience within the workplace, where I've always viewed policy to be incredibly important because it doesn't matter if you fix or assist leadership with developing themselves. If you don't have inclusive, accessible policy that's clearly written and understood and adopted by the workforce completely, then what does it matter at the leadership level? I'm just kind of curious when I was reading through where that as an organizational psychology professional, where would I implement that within the phases?
That's a good question. I've never come across that before. So it's interesting that you bring it up. Typically, when you get into hard policies and those kinds of things, that tends to lend more to the HR side because my initial, again, knee jerk, which is probably the wrong reaction to that is if you're talking about policy, what happens with policy, it has to be enforced. And that's an HR function. So when you're looking at other things, that might not be something that a third party that they're going to bring in and they're going to have any even ability to create policy, enforce policy, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess getting into more of a micro level of what you're thinking would be helpful, but there might be other people. Maybe we have some HR hybrids in here, but I'll open it up to the group because it's an excellent question and something that's very important to think about. Anyone raise a?
I'll give you an example. So for
Please.
like employee deviance, right? Or even leadership when you have their own, especially with a large company like this, 5,000 employees across the United States. Their corporate is going to have expectations of what their company should run like. But once you get to the other side of the United States, you're going to have regional, divisionals, whatever. They're going to have their own cultural type of expectations they're going to run into, and they may modify that policy to be irrelevant or whatever, which is going to ultimately impact the productivity and stuff. So I'm looking at the 15%. I'm like, gee whiz, that's really, really low. Is this a communication thing that's policy? Is it do employees even know it is there, or what's kind of going on? So that's my mindset behind the readability or the accessibility of the policy, I guess. I don't know if that kind of helps clarify.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose if it came up during the discovery phase, that would be attended to. Michelle, do you have a response to that? Yes, please, Michelle.
Somewhat related, I, like Jason, was looking for what's missing in this case study, and kind of related to policy, but not necessarily. I was looking for something around the espoused or demonstrated values and why that did not show up here. And maybe it's in the weeds. Maybe it came up somewhere in phase 3 as part of the team alignment. But I think if that's not called out and part of the implementation to, articulate what those values are, especially around the leadership being aligned, I think that plays a part in changing behavior as well, to understand what do we say we stand on as our values, how do we demonstrate that, how do we communicate that, and maybe it does lead to some changes in policy because it may be in conflict with what those values actually are.
I'm good. So I'm glad you mentioned that. And I'm glad you're looking for the things that aren't there. I don't know what version it is. I added it. There's a couple versions I went through with this to make it a little more substantial than it was, and to actually make it a different. It was like senior VPs and execs. I changed it to the more of the manager aspect of it. But the one place where, so in the 360s, so we use a custom 360, and a lot of times the company, it will be actually based on their values. And even in the executive report, it'll say development goals based on the company's values, and they're clearly laid out. And the actual 360 is broken up into categories specifically by the values. So that's one place. So I want to validate and say kudos for recognizing that. Shame on me for not putting it in the document that was eventually shared. But yes, I want to say that is very important, because that they definitely need to come out, and even going as far as putting those as the basis for a 360, which is pretty powerful. So very good. Thank you for adding that.
Thank you very much. And Nick, let's go to you.
Yeah, there's no perfect situation. There's no perfect consultant. And I think that part of the challenge is translating it. And I appreciate Rich for calling out terms that we use in the discussion all the time, and taking a step to translate. You don't know what you don't know. And so when people don't know what you're saying, it's hard to get your message across. So I think that's, crucial to what does the perfect state look like on the other side of it? What is the goal of the organization? What is the goal of the consultant? And how do those match? And I think that everybody's kind of spoken up about, follow-up and things like that. And I think there's so much connectivity. If you solve this problem in training and development, how much more does productivity go? And how do you find that through line that shows that impact, but may not necessarily show up in the spreadsheet? You're always very business conscious, and, if it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense. But sometimes the investment in some of this feedback, particularly when it comes to leadership and guiding a culture, which, often is personality at scale, you have to have some of that more sort of squishier, how do I define this construct, sort of conversation. And it's why this is fun, for so many of us, is to say, okay, I've seen the research. I know that if you pull this lever, it's going to have these potential impacts, but I can't show you the emotional state of your employee once they feel like they're securely employed. I can show a productivity increase. I can show, less absenteeism. The measurements that we have don't always reflect the true nature of the situation.
Let me ask you this, Jeremy, unless you want to respond to what Nick said.
I'll need a refresher. So I was responding to something Imani mentioned in the chat and trying to figure out how to enable something for the group. So right. I'll need a quick refresher, and then whatever you need.
Nick, the Reader Digest version.
All too often, we don't think about the end goal. Organizations are trying to solve problem A. There's often wild amounts of connectivity and impact and dominoes that fall. And you have to express that value beyond the spreadsheet to the emotional impact, the engagement, and all those things. And oftentimes, the tools that we have at our disposal that are clearest and most demonstrable are not really getting at the state of what's going on.
You mean the types of assessment tools that we have?
No, to measure impact of what we're seeing here. We put this in place. We have a succession plan in place, and now there's job security, and all of a sudden the stress level goes down, and the heir apparent rises to the challenge, whereas maybe before they were floundering. To draw that direct through line between we took this action and this impact was shown. We go to the more concrete when sometimes it's a little bit more abstract as far as why it worked, I guess would be my point to that.
So you're saying, how do we assess not just the actual result, the concrete result, but how do we assess why it worked? Is that the question?
To some degree, yeah.
Oh, how do we assess why it worked? In the there's going to be so much data collected along the way, and so many insights and so many summaries, right? So many it's going to be that information, I think, will be more on a micro level, because even like with workshops, right, you'll probably have some kind of a survey for those. You'll probably have some kind of follow-up survey, at least be asking questions and being in the know as the consultant and getting feedback from like support groups. The coaching sessions, you're going to have summaries, and you'll be able to see in each particular coaching engagement what particularly worked, and that's going to be more individual. When you get to the more macro types of things, well, I guess then the question is it really all these larger things? Because even things like I think there was something about one of the results was increase the adaptability and innovation. That's still, you can't have that on a larger level without having that on the individual and micro level. And it might be something as simple as, all right, we gave everyone had the Hogan judgment report, and we were working with those. We used those in group settings, and we worked those in individual coaching sessions. And we were able to see like what are people's natural style of processing, verbal and numerical information, decision making, risk tolerance, all these things. And maybe and it could be discussions about that. I guess you may never really know, because the data collection up front, data collection cost, it costs so much. There's a website, it's called the ROI Institute. And going through one of their webinars a long time back, they were even saying, I mean, think about just because of trying to collect and understand how it worked. I guess going back to the first thought, ideally you get to some kind of a system, and that system's working and you're tweaking it. It's that continuous process improvement along the way through these different coaching engagements, and making sure that the company's HR and leadership are involved so that you can keep having those conversations. But back to the data collection, they even mentioned some projects you shouldn't even bother to consider an ROI, because it'd be more expensive to determine ROI for an initiative than the ROI that you actually gain back from the initiative. And they know more, ROI, it's like the big nut. I remember a long time back there, I was listening to the director of HR at a huge company give a webinar. My gosh, we're such in Zoom now. It's actually in person. It was from like a SHRM, or it was one of these organizations. She was speaking, and she said, even for her large company, ROI is so tough. A lot of times we just not settle, but settle for return on expectation. So if this is happening and after the initiative this isn't happening, we just say, okay, it's working. There is something there, because ROI can get very sticky. And I know that doesn't answer really anything that you're asking, Nick, but that's my rambles.
Great ramble. Thank you very much, Jeremy. Amani, always great to see you. Let's go to you.
Thank you, Brad. So I just got the document, and I love, the points in it. The succession planning, the 360, and especially what you talked about, the individual development plan as opposed to PIP. Like if we're talking about behavior, most of the times we talk about behavior and forget that before we even get to the behavior, we have to deal with the thought process, or how this individual, the personality of this individual. So I feel like these things, succession plan 360, individual development plans naturally kind of like get rid of the leadership development blockages, like maybe the ego and entitlement that people usually kind of like provoke people to do the micromanagement, or even the overall toxicity of leaderships within organizations. Because when we get to do succession plans, it cuts down on that entitlement or the ego that, they're the only ones in position. Someone else who's coming into, there will be someone else coming in to fill in my shoes. So they would maybe learn to treat people with dignity without that kind of like entitlement, of treating employees anyhow. So to me, when I saw this, my question was going to be on, especially when you talked about the self-reporting part. I wanted to ask, how do we get rid of the self-reporting biases when we kind of like asking on a scale of 1 to 10, because that part comes to like confidence part of how you're confident about a certain situation. So my question was, how do we really account for people who are kind of like overly confident, and then those who are kind of like self-doubting in answering, on this scale as they're kind of like answering these questions of 1 to 10? Because I recently had an encounter with some leadership whereby they had this skill, the measuring confidence, and they failed to really, to me, when I was looking through it, they failed to account to the overly confident people who are going to be putting the 9-10 or even the 8-9-10 scale, who are going to rank 8-9-10 on the scale, because I knew what the policies were. I knew what the norms and the values of what exactly they wanted to train on were. So to me, when I saw that the question that followed after that in the survey did not really ask or even account in alignment with what the policies were, I saw a gap, and I was like, how are they going to account for this if they're not even really considering in asking around the policies within the organization, or even around maybe the values and the norms, the organization, or the norms that they have within the organization. So to me, when I didn't see this, and I'm glad that people really asked about it, my question was really going to be like, how do we account for that self-reporting bias on people who kind of like who we don't know but naturally are self-doubters, and those who are overly confident, who think they can rank themselves high when there's actually a gap in between? That was going to be my question.
Yeah. So with the 1 to 10, that's when I was speaking of with the IDP and during the leadership, during the coaching process. So I'm going to attend to both of those to make sure I hit both sides of your question. With the 360, that's why there will be these other raters, because they can rate them. They can be overconfident and again have these blind spots, like you say, or not give themselves enough credit, and that'll show up because you'll have, depending on the 360, they can crunch it and slice this data really good in many different ways and show, again, like, here you're not rating yourself as high as these other people are, or as high as the average, or wow, you're really rating yourself up here. And so you'll get that for sure. And the biased, we just recognize that it is going to be biased, but that's why we have the other ratings to level everything out, and so that we get a clearer picture with that 360. With the coaching process on the IDP, that's where I'll say, this is going to sound weird, their bias is completely fine and it doesn't really matter. And here's why I say that: because we want to get an idea of how far they think they have advanced. And from my experience, they are usually brutally honest with themselves and with those particular scores. So many times people will say, well, I've actually had a regression in this area, or I'm exactly the same. But that's really just a self check. It's almost like is it better than not doing it? And the question is always, yes, it's better to give someone the opportunity when you're doing personal one-on-one coaching. You have developed a relationship with them over the months. It's a trusted relationship. There's just very little chance that they're going to say, "Oh, I'm doing completely fine on this. I'm doing an absolute 10," because you've been with them and you've been spending so much time with them. You could easily, if you needed to, call them out, ask a follow-up question, tell me what makes you think that way, give me some, I mean, you can do that. In all my coaching, I've never had to do that, but that scale of 1 to 10 is just a really good gauge for them to see, all right, what are some of the areas to continue to improve on, et cetera, and what is my growth. It's also good because it can provide them with a sense of momentum of, all right, this is working. I'm looking forward to these, and here's what's working. Here's what I can continue to focus on and get more engaged and even more involved, or see an area where I need to get more engaged and I need to get more involved. So hopefully I hit both sides of that for you, Amani.
Yay, thank you.
Sure.
And thank you very much, Imani and Jeremy. Our time is up. It is once again flown by. Great discussion. I'd really like to thank Jason and Nick. I've been trying to stump Jeremy for like 5 years now. And while you didn't stump him, you got close. You made him think, and I appreciate that. Jeremy, where are we going to go next week? Do you have a topic for us?
Not yet. It's going to be open discussion, so we might do another case study. Who knows? Or I don't know. Who knows what'll happen between now and a full week from now. But it's good to be back.
Yeah, take a look yourselves, and we'll come up with some good topics. Also, once again, I don't know if you've seen this, Jeremy, but a couple of years ago, we did a podcast with Deborah Peck.
Yes.
And she's got a brand new book. It's Turning Intuition into Science. Harnessing the Power of Organizational Network Analysis, which I don't know how many people are familiar with that, but it's really quite interesting.
It is. It's a good book. I know Deb very well. We just talked before this podcast. Get the book. It'll give you insight into another, like, a really interesting niche area, but also what that is, O&A. It's looking at the white space. So instead of looking at an organization's hierarchy, well, you look at it, but it's really looking at what's actually going on within the organization, what's not shown on an actual hierarchy level, with lots of survey data, lots of really interesting graphs to interpret. But definitely, I highly recommend that book. I highly recommend Deb Peck as well.
There you go. Maybe we can get her back on and we can talk more about it. There you go. Thank you very much, Jeremy. Thank you, everyone, for your contribution this week. And with that, Jeremy, if you want to count us out, we'll see everyone back here in 1 week's time.
Counting out in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1.